than the overall quality of education in Ireland. And would you accept as well, Minister, that English is at a very poor level for kids coming out of the system at the moment?
Deputy Dail, just very, very briefly.
Very briefly, Minister, the extra points in relation to maths we're being told raises the standards and encourages more people in that direction, but does society really benefit? I think particularly in the context of the report out today, where it was revealed that the courses with the high points are almost exclusively dominated now by fee-paying schools. Is it not the case that people who can opt for maths and maybe extra tuition in that area, are they kind of utilising that? I think when you compare it as well with the fact that Gael Scoilin are featuring, are we not sort of handing over access to university for these courses which are being designated the extra points? And would you agree that the actual standards of maths at higher level has been in actual fact dumbed down?
Minister, I'm afraid I'm going to have to keep you very brief. Very brief.
I don't accept the last point you've made that they're being dumbed down. They're certainly different, and some of the third-level teachers of mathematics who are expecting somebody who's ready to go into a very narrow channel of mathematics, like in physics or engineering, are getting a different kind of leaving certificate pupil. But we're running the system between the NCCA and the department to equip people for the rest of their lives coming out of second-level education. There is a debate here in that area, Deputy, and we could go into it at some length. There is a mismatch, and there was a mismatch for quite some time, between the graduates coming into the system in areas for ICT and what was being produced. And part of the problem was identified as a poor standard of, or a low level of uptake for higher level maths. And that was identified by Engineers Ireland and a whole group of other employees, going back about 7 or 8 years, Deputy. And the response was the bonus points that was suggested, taken by Minister Mary Coughlin and implemented, and we've seen the dramatic increase in the uptake. It has some distortionary effects. Every kind of change in a system has a distortionary effect. Is it unjust? It's too early to say, Deputy. But what we do know is that young people, as I said before, make rational choices to maximise their points, and we should understand that in the way in which some subjects are perceived to be easier than others, even though they get the same mark at the end of the day.
Question is in the name of Deputy Brune. You have 30 seconds, Deputy. Just
Thanks, well, just want to welcome the restoration of the summer work scheme and the 40 million that's been allocated for it, and also the 28 million on the minor work scheme. But just to say to the Minister, obviously, that I think since he has been Minister, if my figures are correct, at budget time I estimated that you'd cut the education budget by almost €1 billion since this government has been in power. Almost €1 billion if you put it all together, Minister, over the 3 budgets. While this announcement is welcome, I think, as my own trade union ASTI has said, hopefully it's a step back, to a return to providing the best possible resources for our children. Thanks, Cahill.
The Deputy will be aware of the announcement on the 7th of November of an additional 70 million for school improvement works. This comprises a once-off payment of over 28 million to primary schools as part of the minor work scheme, and a further 40 million to facilitate the reintroduction of the summer work scheme for 2014. Summer work scheme funding will facilitate schools carrying out small and medium-scale building works that will improve and upgrade existing school buildings. Commensurate with the level of funding set aside for the scheme, applications will be assessed in accordance with the prioritisation criteria outlined in the circular accompanying the scheme. Details are available on the Department's website. As the closing date for receipt of applications is the 10th of next month, 10th of December, it is therefore not possible at this point in time to provide the information sought by the Deputy. The Department expects to be in a position to notify successful applicants towards the end of February, early March of next year.
Deputy.
Minister, thanks, Cahill. Well, your last comments there, I think, answered some of the key points in relation to the payment. Can I just ask you in relation to consultants' fees? As you know, some of the works, even if they're small in nature, I understand they obviously need technical expertise, and as I understand it, that can't be recouped or couldn't be recouped previously under the scheme. And I wonder, is that still the case? And just following up on what some colleagues above there in the technical group are saying in relation to the figures today that are being postulated, I think, in the Irish Times in relation to schools. I noticed that is that the 17 highest, if you like, transfer to third level education are from Dublin South Side and are fee paying. Can we be certain that there will be a fair geographical spread of this funding across North Side, West Side Dublin, and indeed the whole country, to ensure that everybody gets a reasonable share of this, and given the fact that we've had 5 years now of this desperate austerity? Thanks, Carla.
Minister.
The adjustments that had to be made in my department, because along with social protection and justice and health, those 4 departments are the big spenders, and to make the corrections that were necessary in order to reductions, cutbacks.
Yeah, they've left their education system struggling.
What I've tried to do, Deputy, has been to protect frontline services as far as possible, which, in response to Deputy Dail and yourself, was...
Minister, Deputy, please.
Was the...
You're taking up the Minister's time now.
Well, fee-paying schools have had their pupil-teacher ratio significantly disimproved relative to what it was for the last 20 years. The burden of carrying the adjustment, correction, bailout, whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, it's putting their hand into somebody's pocket to take money out when they can least afford it in order to regain our economic sovereignty. We haven't recovered that fully yet, but we're in a better place, as indicated by today's unemployment figures and other figures. I've tried to protect, in a growing population area, which is our national population in the education space, the delivery of frontline services, and we will continue to do so.
Deputy McConnell, just very briefly, Deputy.
I too welcome the fact, Minister, that there's going to be a minor works grant and a summer work scheme this year. I think the fact that you discontinued it last year left a lot of schools in a very difficult situation. The CPMSA, which are the management body for 90% of primary schools, indicated that half of our primary schools are in debt. And there's fundraising events going on right, left and centre in every parish in the country, whereby the hard-pressed families, who are the most hard-pressed section really in society, who are trying to put their children through school, are being asked to cough up to make up that deficit. And I would ask, Minister, can you give a commitment that next year that it will be here to stay and that you won't discontinue it again after this once-off, which is what you've indicated you're introducing now? Thank you.
Well, while we're still in the calendar year for this one, and the next budget is going to kick in later, I'm not in a position to make that commitment. I can tell you that the indicators would suggest that any adjustments downwards or otherwise in the education budget will probably be less next year than they were this year. But we'll have to wait and see, because there's a whole lot of variables that play into that. The great thing about the parental engagement, community engagement in Irish education relative to other countries is that a small grant, and I was in 2 schools in Cork on Thursday and Friday, where because a grant had been made available out of the mainstream grant, I'm not talking about minor works or small schools, but a building extension replacing 5 prefabs in one case. The parents were so happy to see that happening that money, in fact, leveraged a total sum of which 25% came from the parents and 75% came from the taxpayer, because of the relationship in this country between parental community groups and the local school. So the money can, on occasions, particularly getting them out of prefabs, which was a scandal. We should never have had young people for the length of time. At the height of the Celtic Tiger, 20% of all primary school kids were in prefabs, surrounded by ghost estates now.
Okay, and the next question is in the name of Deputy Catherine Murphy, and you have 30 seconds just to introduce it.
Thank you. Maynooth Post Primary School currently has 1,300 pupils. Very successful school educationally from the point of view of inclusiveness, and it's a unifying force within the town. The decision was made recently to, it's obviously the footprint is too small, they're moving to a new educational campus. But in the decision that was made, it was made to create a second school, a community college, but to change the ethos of the post-primary school from that of a multi-denominational school to that of a Catholic school. Minister, who has the power to make that decision? Is it the department? Is it the board of management? Is it the VEC? Or is it the parents? Or is it a combination of each?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. The school to which you refer is a non-designated community college under the patronage of the local Education and Training Board, as the VECs are now known, Non-designated community colleges have a multi-denominational ethos and cater for pupils of all faiths and belief systems. The Department is not in receipt of any application from the patron to change either the patronage or the ethos of this school. I understand that while the school historically had the services of a Catholic chaplain provided by the Catholic Archdiocese of Dublin, that this has not been the case in recent years. I also understand that the faith background of pupils will not be a factor in any way under the enrolment policies being developed for both this school and the new post-primary school being commenced in the area in question.
Deputy, 1 minute.
Minister, I spoke with the CEO of the VC in relation to this, because I had a number of parents on to me who were concerned about the what they understood to be a redesignation to that of a Catholic school, with the new school being a community or a multi-denominational school with the intake from a variety of different sources, some of them outlying schools. The only conclusion I could draw was that there was a redesignation from the conversation that I have, but I mean, you're clearly telling me that that is not the case. It will continue to be a multi-denominational, all-inclusive school, and that the new school that will stand side by side with it will have pretty much the same ethos. Is that what I'm to understand from your reply? And if it is a question that it is to be changed, who is it that has the power to change that ethos? Because obviously it would fundamentally change the nature of the school if it was to cease being a multi-denominational school.
Thanks, Deputy Minister.
The system that now operates, Deputy, is where the Department identifies the need to replace an existing school or the need to build a new school. In the case of an existing school, the existing patron of that school, if they apply and if they're granted the monies for the building of a new school, they would get that and the patronage would stay as it was previously. For a new school in an area where a new provision, because of the growing population, the Department identifies the need in absolute terms as to the provision of space. It then invites patron bodies to express an interest in running that school. And my role through the Department and the New Schools Establishment Group is to ensure that there is two things: a diversity of choice in relation to the patrons and the ethos, and manifestation of parental preference. In other words, to try and reconcile those two. So if there are existing schools in the area, a new school of a different patron is, if there's parental choice for that manifested by the patron group, and there are rules and concerns about how that should function, that's the only way in which it can be decided. A school cannot unilaterally change its ethos or its patronage from one ethos to another without getting clearance from the Department of Education.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Stagg.
Minister, firstly, I'd like to thank you for providing 2,000 new 1,000 pupil schools in Maynooth. But I'd like to ask you if you're aware that the agreement reached between the parents in Maynooth and yourself concerning the common enrolment policy has been set aside effectively by the VEC, who have produced 2 separate enrolment policies. Are you aware of the disappointment and the anger that parents feel at this decision? And can I ask you, Minister, if you will intervene to ensure that your decision stands in both the letter and the spirit of that agreement between yourself and the parents?
I'm not officially or informally aware of such a change. It has been brought to my attention today in this House by both deputies for the constituency. I will make my inquiries. The arrangement that was made in response to a local expression of community interest, I thought was the best arrangement that could be made that met the desires of the maximum number of people. If you're telling me, both deputies, that this has been unilaterally changed and you've received complaints to that effect, then I will make inquiries.
Thanks. And the next question, which we just have time for, is in the name of Deputy Dail. You have 30 seconds to introduce
thanks,
it.
Count Corla. Minister, I'm aware, obviously, that you're bringing in a new enrolment policy to synchronise things across the system, but this question really relates to a situation where parents are asked to pay money upon registering their children, not necessarily in terms of enrolling, but for subsequent years, which seems to be going on, and if you have any plans to deal with that.
Recognised schools in the free education scheme have teaching resources and other funding allocated to them on a different basis from those schools that charge fees. Continued eligibility for such funding arrangements are contingent on a school not requiring mandatory fees or payments from existing pupils or from those seeking admission to the school. Therefore, it is both inappropriate and contrary to the Department's requirements that a recognised school, other than a recognised fee-paying school or fee-charging school, would require payment on a yearly registration fee as a condition of continued enrolment in the school. This is an issue that is addressed in the recently published draft legislation that is before the Oireachtas Education Committee, which will regulate these matters in a manner that hasn't been the case. The framework will also seek to improve the admissions process and ensure that the way schools decide on applications is structured, fair and transparent.
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank the Minister for that. I think the statement was actually very strong, and it is the case that a number of schools are operating quite a skillful approach in a letter which sort of says, register your son and daughter by such and such a date, and by the way, there's a fee attached, in a way in which, in essence, blackmails them or compels them, or they feel compelled to pay the money. And I think the way you've clarified it here actually can be of benefit to those parents who in these austere times don't want to go along with that type of approach. So thanks for that.
The schools are entitled to ask for a voluntary contribution. Many parents are happy to do so if they're in a position to so provide. But schools that are in receipt of funding as non-fee charging, and of the 730 post-primary schools, there are only 55 fee-charging schools, and there are no proposals to increase them. In fact, there are inquiries being made by some fee-charging schools as to whether they will convert into the free scheme. Under no circumstances can a school in the mainstream non-fee charging status, where it receives money from the department, taxpayers' money, not the department's money, taxpayers' money, can they charge on a mandatory basis compulsory contributions or fees of whatever kind?
Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of question time now, and the next item on the agenda is leaders' questions. So we'll just wait a moment with Ceann Comhairle.
We now move on to leaders' questions, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, the coil of discretionary medical cards continues unabated, and particularly of discretionary medical cards, taking cards from very, very sick people, terminally ill people, and such people are still being asked to document and to prove that they have incurable conditions. And many of these cases, and much of that information, is already well known to the health authorities. So letters continue to issue in pursuit of a policy change that this government has decided upon, which is essentially to get rid of discretionary medical cards out of the system. And it continues, Taoiseach, as revealed in today's Daily Mirror, for example, the Irish Mirror, where a terrible headline reads, "Prove that you are dying." And it relates to a very, very high-profile case indeed that would be known to everyone in this House and indeed to the entire country. It's the case of Marie Fleming, who, as you know, was pursuing a case of assisted suicide and legislation for that, and so on. Now, her condition is well known. She is terminally ill, yet she did not get her medical card automatically renewed. She was asked to provide documentary evidence to prove that her condition
is incurable. Now, our partner Tom Curran has spoken about the indignity of that. But it illustrates what many families, thousands of families across the country who have very sick people and people with significant medical conditions are experiencing because of a fundamental change in policy in relation to discretionary medical cards. People who've had cards for many years because of their conditions. And last week I raised the case of Katie Connolly, a Down syndrome child, and Ronan Woodhouse. And I also raised the case of an 11-and-a-half-year-old child with a very rare syndrome. And now thousands more are very anxious and fearful of what the health service plan has in store for people with medical cards. So can I ask you, Taoiseach, will you once and for all accept that there has been a change of policy in relation to discretionary medical cards? And the revelations today in the Mirror pertaining to Marie Fleming is a further illustration of that reality on the ground. You spoke last week about information flowing out around in unreality. But the reality is there for Marie Fleming, it's there for Katie Connolly, it's there for Ronan Woodhouse, Taoiseach. I'm asking you to change the policy, Taoiseach.
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, I don't have the details of the case that's so high profile, but let me say this. I'm not sure.
Please.
No, can I reply to Deputy? May I reply to Deputy Martin's? May I reply to Deputy Martin's question?
Stay quiet, please. Thank you. Would you stay quiet, please? Would you mind staying quiet? It's Deputy Martin's question, not yours.
Deputy Martin asked a legitimate question about
Yes,
a
exactly.
sensitive issue. May I reply to
allow for a reply. Thank you.
Deputy Martin's question is about a change of policy insofar as discretionary medical cards is concerned. My understanding is that in this particular case, this is not a discretionary medical card. This is a medical card on entitlement, both on income grounds and on medical grounds. So it's a case of renewal of an ordinary medical card. Deputy Martin is well aware that in the case of a no change policy here, people start off not being entitled to a medical card, an application is lodged, and people are entitled to a medical card either on income grounds and on medical grounds, and then, depending on the nature of those circumstances, a discretion is applied. 20,000 medical cards were issued on discretionary grounds already this year. But my understanding, Deputy Martin, and I don't know whether you can confirm this or not, is that this is a normal full medical card granted on eligibility grounds both in income and on medical grounds, and it's a normal renewal of a medical card. Now, if I listened correctly to Mary's partner saying he wasn't objecting to the renewal process, but the fact was that it appears as if there was contact on a number of occasions from the HSE about the verification of the woman's medical position. Now, you know and I know that a person... Listen, don't... Please, this is an issue.
Please allow to reply without interruption.
It's an issue of... This is an issue.
Sorry.
This is an issue.
Would you please?
Deputy Hannon.
Would you please?
This is an issue.
Through the chair, thank you. Through the chair.
Deputy Hannon, this is an issue that concerns a terminally ill person. Now, as I understand it, the circumstances are that this is a normal, full medical card for renewal. A person does not become unterminally ill. Once this is verified, and there are significant numbers of people who are terminally ill, that position does not reverse itself. And I accept, Deputy Martin, that in the process of centralising all of these medical cards around the country, there has to be a lesson learned here, in that a person who is terminally ill and who has a full medical card that is not withdrawn, and it wasn't withdrawn in this case, it is having an effective, simple way of saying, look, you understand this position, the medical condition of the person has not changed, and so the card continues.
Thank you.
Now, as I say to you, genuinely, I do not have all the details of this, but my understanding is that it is an ordinary renewal process for a full medical card, as distinct from a discretionary card. And there's a lesson to be learned in there by the HSE, in the sense that here is a terminally ill person. That unfortunately is not going to change. Therefore, there has to be an effective and compassionate and understanding process of the continuation of the card.
Thank you.
I think that's something that, that unfortunately this case points out where a change must occur in the process of renewal, so that people do not have to deal with verification of an illness that is terminal.
Deputy Martin.
Taoiseach, the case from Marie Fleming is known to everybody, and Deputy Hannigan is correct. Above all, it's known to the health authorities, who will be acutely aware of her condition. And why should somebody who, if you say, is ordinarily entitled on income grounds to a medical card, have to provide any documented evidence about medical conditions? Why? The person concerned was asked to provide documentary evidence about an incurable condition, and the HSE had all that anyway. The real problem, Taoiseach, is this, that in the 2013 service plan, the bottom line was it provided for the elimination of about 40,000 medical cards. That's the bottom line, Taoiseach. That is what is going on. Don't you get it? That's why the thousands of letters are going out to children with multiple conditions. I raised the 11-and-a-half-year-old child last week.
Thank you.
Asthma, non-verbal, legally blind, profound mental disability, a very rare syndrome, very, very rare. Card taken from that child. Alex White said, as a minister, confirmed that 10,000 discretionary medical cards were taken out alone last year in a parliamentary written reply. This has never happened before. And it's happening, Taoiseach, because you've endorsed the HSE service plan last year, which basically said to the HSE, go and get those cards and use income eligibility guidelines. Review every one of them. And it comes from the CNAG report and the review.
Thank you,
and the basic rule of thumb is this, that any card that has been issued that is above income guidelines gets a letter. And come and prove us that you need the card back. That is what is happening, Taoiseach. That's the change in policy.
Thank you, Ted.
And you just keep on saying, no, there's no change. The Jack and Jill Foundation, the parents of that, who, and you know children who avail of the services of Jack and Jill are in many instances life-limiting, very difficult conditions. They're aghast and flabbergasted at your response and the response of the Minister to the reality of their experience in trying to keep their medical cards, having cards taken from them, the sickest and toughest of conditions. So please, Taoiseach, accept what I am saying from a bona fide point of view. There needs to be a change.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you.
These kind of situations should not be happening. And we can do it and we can change it. And I would ask you to go now and accept that what's going on is wrong and change it.
Well, you started off in the first part of your question by asking about discretionary medical cards. And you named a particularly high-profile case of a woman who is terminally ill. Now, my understanding is that that is not a discretionary medical card. It is a full medical card granted on full eligibility, and the process is about the normal renewal of that medical card. In the case, Deputy Martin, of somebody who is terminally ill, where there's an application made for a discretionary card, the system is that there is an emergency card issued for 6 months and then renewed and verified after that. But that's in the case of a discretionary card for a person who is terminally ill. As I understand this, there is no income coming into the household here except a disability allowance and a carer's allowance, which qualifies Mary Fleming for a full medical card. And as I understand it, the conversation was about the process of the normal renewal of that medical card. Now, Deputy Martin, there has been no change in the eligibility limits for medical cards. I'm talking here, Deputy McGrath, about a woman who is terminally ill, and if you choose to make smart comments about that, then that's fair enough. If you choose to make smart, Deputy Martin asks me a legitimate question. What I can say to you is that, like, when you say, Deputy Martin, that thousands and thousands of cards have been withdrawn, there were 100,000 new medical cards issued already this year, and there were 20,000 discretionary cards. Now, we have to have a conversation about this. I'm saying to you that the process of renewal in a case of a person who is terminally ill, there's a lesson here to be learned by the HSE, A person who is deemed and verified to be terminally ill is not suddenly going to have their medical condition changed. So there needs to be compassion and an effective understanding of how that card is to be renewed if it's given, if it's a full medical card. In the case of a discretionary card, clearly that's where discretion kicks in. But this is not that case, as I understand it. Now, I don't know whether you have any better information than I have. But my understanding is that Ms Fleming is entitled to a full medical card, and what's involved here is the process. And I don't blame her partner for being annoyed if it's the case that there were calls from the HSE about verification of the illness here. In the case of where it's verified once that a person, for whatever the terminal illness ailment is, have to have an understanding of how you put in place a process to have an effective renewal process that takes that pressure away from that person.
Thank you. Deputy Adams.
Concourier dus Bawalium Cobron Ayanul Chila and Tahar Alex Reid Buharaha Jerafaraka Mora as Margaret Augustus Anchin Ada August Pobble and Redemptorus Far Untak Kroga Ba and Tahar Reid August Gan and Upwork Rua Yanashe Nibe Shehan on and you. Taoiseach, tegan go bhfuil plán an HSE ag Ira, Slánta, Alar na Húra. Is plán é seo bhfuil duine ar fud na Stáit an buirithe faoi. And the reason go bhfuil duine an buirithe is any health service, or the quality or the state of any health service, is a very good indicator of how society treats the sick, including the elderly, children and citizens with disabilities. And this is particularly so in a state which describes itself as a republic. Yesterday, the Health Service Executive delivered its 2014 National Service Plan to Minister Riley. And that includes almost 700 million euros, we're told, in cuts, and there's speculation that the figure could be closer to 1 billion. Austerity rules, Taoiseach. There's very widespread concern about the effect that this will have. And, you know, clearly, this is the smallest or the worst small country in the Western world to be sick in. We have just been told at the weekend that patients with breast, bowel and cervical cancer fared worse here than in the vast majority of industrialised states between 2006 and 2011. And as you know, last Friday the HSE confirmed that 24 health agencies, including some hospitals, are paying top-ups to their managers. Now, Taoiseach, in a republic, indeed in any decent society, citizens have a right to a first-class health service on the basis of need. And how you deal with this will be a mark of your government's tenure. You clearly have no faith in the Minister of Health. Your department has assumed responsibility, along with the Department of Minister Howland, for health spending. So you won't be able to blame Minister Riley for your government taking up to 1 billion out of the People's Health Services. So I have two questions, Taoiseach. Firstly, can you confirm for the Dail the scale of cuts contained in the service plan? And secondly, can you tell us when the government intends to publish this plan?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, those said them lat hachta asachta no those you find Tahar Reid. Hasmer me hen couple agus tasam gamai on ober Jean intach rinne session ila process na shiachana itush satush agus ni one sitirsha akitir na mask spawn freshen. Ni hasme gepasanta an Tahar a couple ak vt sport am lesh agus gynny'n idio trocra anam dealish. Yes, the Health Service Executive have an obligation to produce their health service plan for the acceptance and approval by the Minister for Health, based upon the budgetary allocation to the Department of Health and the ancillary services. The plan was delivered by the Health Service Executive to the Minister yesterday, as is their obligation, by last evening, I'm sure with accompanying correspondence. So the situation now, Deputy Adams, is that the Minister for Health has 3 weeks to reflect and consider that plan and give his comments on acceptance or amendment of the plan as the case might be. And that work is already underway. So I don't want to comment any further upon it, except to confirm to you that it has been delivered and to confirm to you that the Minister and his officials are now working on the presentation of the plan to see whether it's acceptable to him or whether he considers it should be amended in one or other fashion.
Deputy Adams.
Well, Taoiseach, you say it's been prepared and given to the Minister of Health, and of course that's right. But you avoided the new situation where your department and the Department of Public Expenditure have assumed responsibility, along with the Minister for health spending. And, you know, on top of all the other cuts that we worry about, you've targeted 113 million euros of cuts to medical cards in 2014, and that will result in thousands losing medical cards. Kate McShane is a baby. She's only 2-year-old, Down syndrome child, requiring heart surgery and long-term GP and hospital care. She's been denied a full medical card. Now, when I brought this to your attention, you invited me to send this case and other cases to you, and I did that. I sent you a number of cases. I didn't get a reply from you, Taoiseach. I got a reply from the HSE. And most of the people were denied their medical cards. Only one had the decision reversed. And Kate was denied her medical card. Now, this is Kate, Taoiseach. Taoiseach, order Shaw. This is Kate.
Sorry, Deputy,
she's less than 2 years old.
Authorised in the chamber.
Right? She's a child.
Deputy,
she's paying the penalty for your austerity policies. Now, Taoiseach, can you tell us how you expect the health service, how do you expect the health service to survive with cuts of up to €1 billion in 2014 on top of all the other cuts taken out of health by you and by those who preceded you in government?
What I said to you was, Deputy, there's a process here to be followed. The process is that the government decide on the budget and put it through the Dail and the Oireachtas. In the case of the Minister for Health, the HSE respond to the Minister for Health in respect of providing a health service plan to implement for effective running of the health services based on the figures given to the department in the budget. Now, the Minister for Health has 3 weeks to reflect and consider that plan and give his approval for it or not. As I pointed out to you already, the Department of the Taoiseach and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and the Department of Health look at the plan, and will look at the plan and are looking at it, within the statutory requirement of the Minister to respond to that, that's what he'll do. Now, Minister, his job in this case is to be able to say, I accept the plan, I approve the plan, or I approve the plan with the following amendments. And that's a matter that's already underway. I consider your presentation of the face of a young baby here, or a young child. Well, it's for you to do that, if that's what you want to do, Deputy Adams, and I can't stop you in the House.
It's contrary to standing orders.
I'd say to you, if you want to make sure that I get something myself, give it to me before you leave the chamber here. I'll be very happy to respond. To be honest with you, there's a veritable river of material comes into the Department of the Taoiseach in any 1 week. I don't and I can't and don't see every single item of it. So if you want to give me something again, Deputy, make sure I get it myself personally. Thank you.
Deputy Donnelly.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, this evening, Dáil Éireann will debate a motion asking for the government to lobby the ECB and the European Commission to destroy the promissory note bonds of €28 billion. Now, you don't normally speak in the private member's business, so I wanted to take the opportunity to get your thoughts. In February, as you know, a €28 billion IOU from the Irish people to Anglo-Irish Bank was converted into a €28 billion IOU from the Irish people to the Central Bank of Ireland. Now, this did reduce the borrowing costs, which is to be welcomed, but we should be absolutely clear that the Irish people still owe that €28 billion. We raised this, Taoiseach, directly with the Troika recently and said what would happen if the Irish state simply refused to pay the Central Bank of Ireland this money. And they said it was against the rules of monetary financing, which it is, and which is reasonable, because central banks can't go around printing money and handing it for free to governments in normal circumstances. However, Taoiseach, these, as you well know, are not normal circumstances, because it is the ECB who, at best, facilitated, and in my opinion coerced, both your government and the previous government into paying tens of billions of euro of public money to the creditors of private banks. And that essentially what this 28 billion euro is, Taoiseach. It's a debt incurred by the Irish people to make sure that private creditors to Anglo-Irish and Irish nationwide don't have to incur any losses for their bad investment decisions. Now, Taoiseach, the ECB had no problem changing the rules when it came to protecting the banks. In socialising private sector losses, the ECB essentially tore up the rule book on Europe's market-based economy. But when it comes to a workable solution to removing those losses from the shoulders of the people, the ECB hides behind the same rulebook.
Question, please.
And so the motion before the Dáil this evening, Taoiseach, will ask for your government to lobby the ECB and the European Commission for a one-off change, an exemption to the rules of monetary financing to allow for the Central Bank of Ireland to tear up those bonds. Now, Taoiseach, I have listened over the last 3 years to your government's position. And I still don't know, I honestly still don't know whether or not you're paying the money because you think it's the least. Do you believe that these are debts properly incurred by the Irish state and they're due? And so my question is a very simple one, Taoiseach, and it's this. Do you believe that the Irish people should pay the 28 billion which was loaned in order to make sure that creditors to Anglo-Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide didn't have to take any losses for their investments?
Thank you.
Taoiseach.
Well, we always live up to our obligations, Deputy Donnelly. Position is that week after week in here for a long time, we had people raising questions about the promissory note, about the requirement to pay 3.1 billion every year to Anglo for 10 years. The government in our negotiations through the Department of Finance and the Central Bank in its negotiations with the European Central Bank arrived at a position where this has been moved out to 2038. We don't have any comments now about the 3.1 billion that was required to be borrowed and paid in respect of Anglo each year. The court has handed down its judgment in a 68-page judgment today in favour of the state. I'd point out to you that the decision of acceptance by the ECB of Ireland's position here has improved our position, obviously, has allowed for further assistance in respect of the reduction of the interest rates and the extension of the loans that were taken out. And I'm sure you're quite well aware of the independently verified figures from the Central Statistics Office today, showing 58,000 jobs created in the past 12 months. The drop in the unemployment rate to below 13%, which is significant in the signs of confidence in different sectors of the economy. I hope that can be improved upon in 2014. The government will be opposing the private member's business this evening. And we move on to grow our economy and provide opportunities and jobs for our people. At the end of the day, Deputy Donnelly, you know as well as I do that what people need here are opportunities for employment, opportunities for work and opportunities for job. And that's where government, meeting our obligations, will continue to work towards. Clearly, the decision of the 29th of June last year in respect of the ESM still stands, and that's a matter that will be negotiated through banking union, supervision, Capital 4 directors, and is part of a big agenda in front of us.
Deputy Donnelly, 1 minute.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Taoiseach, just to be clear so that everybody understands, we have not avoided borrowing 3 billion a year for the next 10 years. What we did instead was borrow 28 billion this year. It just so happens that we borrowed the 28 billion this year at a lower interest rate than we borrowed the 3 billion in subsequent years, hence the lower cost of funding. But let's be under no illusion. We issued a bond to the Central Bank of Ireland. That means we borrowed the money this year. Taoiseach, there seems to be a conspiracy of silence around the promissory note bonds. I asked Minister Noonan to identify the bondholders, or to take steps to identify them, and he refused to do that. I asked Minister Noonan to present an estimate to the House of the savings for the promissory note bond restructure. He said it was too complicated to do. I asked recently for an amount per bank that was already guaranteed on the night of the bank guarantee, under the 100,000 guaranteed, and I'm told that it's commercially sensitive. We're not allowed to know, the Irish Parliament is not allowed to know how much money we guaranteed on the night of the guarantee. And Taoiseach, with respect, you have completely avoided the question. It's again the same thing. My question is very simple. My question is, regardless of whether or not it can be achieved, what we are asking is that the Irish government requests an exemption so the bonds can be destroyed.
Thank you.
But before that can be done, it's very important that Dail Éireann knows whether or not you believe that the Irish people, regardless of whether they end up paying,
Thank you, Deputy.
whether or not the Irish people should have to pay that money to cover the bad investments for Anglo and Irish nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you might have done things differently had the opportunity a number of years ago. That wasn't the case. And given the circumstances that we were faced with, I think the government, the Minister for Finance, the Minister for Public Expenditure and the Central Bank here put a very cogent case to the European Central Bank in respect of the decision made, which was announced here some time ago. I'm sure that the borrowing requirements would have been produced with the accounts when the promissory note was first put forward by, I think, by the late Minister for Finance. But insofar as government are concerned, the finance bill is on again tonight. Your private member's business is on tonight. Minister for Finance will be here to answer any detailed questions that you have in that regard.
That completes leaders' questions for today. We now move on to question to Taoiseach, but before doing that, I wish to advise the House that 22 deputies have submitted matters under Standing Order 27A, topical issues, which will be listed in the official debate. The matters raised by the following deputies have been selected for discussion. Deputies Noel Harrington and John Deasy, the need to ensure all marine vessels have a fully working EPIR unit. Number 2, Deputy Eamon Maloney, the results of the reports into third-level feeder schools. Number 3, Deputy Robert Troy, public procurement of childcare training modules. And number 4, Deputy Mick Wallace, the need to make provision for increases in specialist maternity staff.
I propose to take 1 to 38 together.
1 to 38.
I participated at the European Council on the 24th, 25th of October, the outcome of which I reported in detail to the House on the 6th of November. I also travelled to Paris on Tuesday, the 12th of November, for the second conference on youth employment in Europe at the invitation of President Hollande. I was accompanied to Paris by the Minister for Social Protection, Joan Burton. I had informal contacts with a number of colleagues at each of these meetings. Separately, I spoke with Chancellor Merkel on the 25th of September and sent her a letter to congratulate her on her election result. The Paris event was organised by President Hollande to maintain political momentum behind addressing the youth employment challenge. This included identifying particular actions towards implementing the youth guarantee, agreed by the Irish Presidency in February. It followed a similar event organised by Chancellor Merkel in Berlin in July. My own contribution focused on digital skills and the potential of the digital economy generally, including in the light of the October European Council and the recent Dublin Web Summit. I believe the discussion reflected well the huge priority being accorded to this issue, which is affecting all member states across Europe. Prime Minister Enrico Letta visited Dublin at my invitation on the 7th of November, returning my own visit to Rome last November. We agreed that the visit marked the start of a more strategic and more structured Italian-Irish engagement on EU issues. We discussed a range of current EU issues with a particular focus on banking union, on EMU and youth unemployment. Following the government meeting of the Thursday, the 14th of November, I announced the government's decision to exit the Troika programme in the House. Subsequently, I spoke with a number of European Council colleagues, including Chancellor Merkel, Italian Prime Minister Letta and Finnish Prime Minister Katainen, to inform them of the decision taken by the government regarding our exit from the Troika programme. I also informed Prime Minister Cameron's office. In these calls, I explained the decision we had taken and the key reasons behind it, that is to say, favourable market and sovereign conditions, strong cash reserves, historically low sovereign bond yields. Public finances under control, with the government committed to reducing the deficit to less than 3% in 2015, putting the debt ratio on a downward path. Strengthen governance at the European level with the two-pack, six-pack and the Stability Treaty, the introduction of the ESM, and major efforts by the ECB to do whatever it takes to safeguard the currency, and improving the domestic and international economic conditions and sentiment. I thank them for their support to Ireland over the last 3 years, and I look forward to further support in the coming period. In relation to the October and December European Councils, as the House will recall, I made a detailed statement to the Dáil on the 6th of November on the October European Council, and I do not propose to repeat that here. In relation to December's European Council, President Van Rompuy has prepared an annotated draft agenda which builds on the work done in October. The agenda was considered by the General Affairs Council on Tuesday the 19th of November and will be considered by them again in December prior to the Council. The meeting is expected to cover the following issues: economic and monetary union, including banking union; economic and social policy, including SME financing and taxation; common security and defence policy; enlargement; migration and energy. Of these, banking union is currently the outstanding political priority across the Union. We are committed to following through on the decisions that we already made on banking union on December's Council will be a particularly important one in that regard. I will, of course, make a statement to the House in December, ahead of the December European Council meeting, and also subsequent to it.
Donald, I think Deputy Adam.
Thank you, Count Corla. And I understand the questions have to be grouped, but there are 38 of these together. So I presume that we will have an opportunity, Count Corla, to come in and out and to make a couple of contributions. Thank you, Taoiseach. Taoiseach, 2 weeks ago, Minister Noonan told the Finance Committee that there would be no discussion of Ireland's exit of the bailout at ECOFIN, and that he hadn't finished his round of meetings on the margins of the Eurogroup. But less than 24 hours after saying that, there was an emergency cabinet meeting and then statements, as you have referred to the Dáil. Can you tell us, please, what happened between the end of the Finance Committee at noon on Wednesday the 13th and the panic of Thursday morning the 14th? It seems clear that pressure came from somewhere and that the government rushed into a decision. So, Taoiseach, did you receive a phone call on Wednesday afternoon from Chancellor Merkel? Did you have any contact with the German Chancellor on Wednesday or Thursday? And was the issue of a precautionary line of credit discussed with Chancellor Merkel or any other of the EU leaders you have spoken to or met recently? You might give us some detail on that. Your government has proclaimed that exiting the bailout and the decision not to seek a post-bailout credit line is this state's reassertion of its economic sovereignty, and that's a very nice line, but I think we're all aware that in reality it's far from the truth. Isn't it a fact, Taoiseach, that until the loans received from the Troika are substantially paid down, we face twice yearly monitoring by the Commission of our books? Isn't it a fact, Taoiseach, that the Commission will conduct, in liaison with the ECB, regular review missions to assess our economic, fiscal and financial situation? Media reports have stated clearly that this process could continue for decades. You might want to comment on that. On top of that, of course, the fiscal treaty, which you energetically pushed for, requires that we continue to be monitored. As of next year, our budget proposals will be the subject of budgetary surveillance by the Commission, and the Commission will issue an opinion on budget 2015. And of course, there is also the risk of further conditions being applied until we get our structural deficit to 0.5% and our debt to GDP ratio to 60%. So, which, let's to be honest, Taoiseach, until or unless you sort out something with the ASM on retrospective bank recapitalisation, won't be happening anytime soon. So I think it's a fallacy to say that we've regained our economic sovereignty, because sovereign states don't get twice yearly visits from officials in Europe to make sure they're following orders on economic policy. Our economic sovereignty will not be regained until Irish governments, and with respect, it won't be yours, start formulating budgets in alliance with and in the interests of the Irish people, and when the approval of the Irish people is the only approval the Irish government is seeking. The truth, Taoiseach, I put to you is that whilst the Troika may be leaving, the Troika mindset remains in your government. Over your 2.5 years in office, we have seen you slavishly follow the policies of the last Fianna Fáil government and clutch to the embrace of austerity. You've cut and damaged and hurt the most vulnerable in Irish society at the bidding sometimes of your European masters. So Taoiseach, can you set out for us what happened what was the choreography and what were the conversations, and was one of the conversations with Chancellor Merkel in respect of the announcement that you made in the Dail on Thursday? Can you explain the difference between the Finance Minister's position at noon on Wednesday and your position here in the Dail on Thursday? And could you comment, please, on the further austerity measures and consolidation that will be necessary despite the Troika leaving town?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, for somebody who aspires to the leadership of your party and who doesn't believe at all in Europe, you make a long speech about lots of things here. You asked me what happened. What happened is that the government made its mind up and made a very clear and very precise and indeed very courageous decision arising from the sacrifices made by the Irish people over the last number of years to the point where we made a decision about the formal closure of the bailout programme that this country has been in. That's what happened. And before the Minister for Finance went to the ECOFIN meeting, where there were some comments about the position of Spain and what they might do, the Irish government, on behalf of the Irish people, looked at the options, of which there were 3. 1, leave with a precautionary credit line from the EU IMF. 2, leave with a precautionary credit line from the IMF. 3, let the programme formally end and not seek a precautionary credit line at all. So the Cabinet discussed that, not, I might say, in any, as a result of any emergency meeting, not as a result of phone calls from people, not as a result of pressure, but at the right time, making the right decision based on the information available to us and taking into account the circumstances in which the country finds itself. And those circumstances were very much improved from what had been inherited just 2.5 years beforehand. And those circumstances were that the National Treasury Management Agency were able to go back into the markets and able to do so very strongly, able to sell Irish bonds at less than 4%, down from 15%, where they were entitled to go back onto the international markets, where exports are running at an all-time high, where a buffer zone had already been built up by the National Treasury Management Agency of over 20 billion, where clearly the 500 billion backstop available to all other Eurozone countries is available to Ireland. So, Deputy MacDonald, there weren't any pressurising phone calls, if you like. It's a very clear decision made by the government on the recommendation of the Minister for Finance, having discussed these matters in Brussels, in Frankfurt, in Washington, with other leaders, Tánaiste and myself, on different political occasions. You made a lot of assertions about sovereignty. The fact of the matter is that on the 16th of December, the barrier that surrounded Ireland in terms of its bailout programme will no longer be there. Does that restore full economic sovereignty to us? No more than any other Eurozone country. We are subject, as all other Eurozone countries are, to the 2-pack and the 6-pack, and we'll comply with those regulations. Clearly, the bailout programme meant 12 quarterly, deeply analytical, deeply invasive visits here from Troika personnel in order that the conditions that Ireland was required to comply with were actually fulfilled, and that's what happened. You comment that the Troika will continue to pay twice-yearly visits for a considerable period. Every country in the Eurozone will have its regular visit. Every country in the Eurozone. Ireland, because we're emerging from a bailout programme, will have a second, as will other countries that emerge from a bailout programme as well. So for the time ahead, there is greater flexibility to our government and therefore to our country in terms of what we do. We've